In the fall of 2020, as part of my first term in seminary, I took the Intercultural Development Inventory, which is an assessment tool meant to gauge an individual's comfort with cultural difference. I felt its significance because, like many people, over the past several years, my eyes, ears, and heart have been opened to the depth of our country's systemic racism problem. I've put intention behind reading and listening to Black and Brown voices, and I hoped that my learning would be affirmed. My results showed that I still have a ways to go before I can honestly claim cultural competence, which isn't surprising. As someone who has benefited from racist structures all my life, I understand now that the journey of anti-racism will be long. But one of the assessment's recommendations came as a bit of a surprise. It said, "Your task is to develop a deeper understanding of your own culture." When I first read this, I was confused. I thought, isn't the point of cultural competence to understand and center the other? Aren't I supposed to be quiet and listen? But as I thought about it, I realized that by rushing past the work of building an understanding of my own cultural lens, I was shortchanging my ability to show up in a fully authentic way. I had decentered myself too much and needed to explore why. Since my assessment, I've pondered my family history. I've been inspired by Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, to think about epigenetic trauma. The idea that trauma is a family heirloom passed on through genetic tags. Menakem focuses primarily on the trauma resulting from slavery and systemic racism, but also describes the specific traumas found in white bodies, going back to the brutality of pre-19th century England as an example. This epigenetic white trauma might help explain where our ingrained patterns of response to stress come from. I've wondered, what trauma did my German and Norwegian ancestors endure in 18th and 19th century Europe that drove them to America? What did they experience as new immigrants in southern Minnesota? Has any of their trauma been passed into my body? With the murder of George Floyd, last summer's uprising, Daunte Wright's killing, and the Chauvin trial's outcome, Minneapolis has experienced a collective trauma, and it's tempting for white people to claim it. I think about how my own feelings have manifested this past year, and they match what I've read are responses to trauma: shame, guilt, anger, a feeling of helplessness, and the sense that I am not worthy of community. My emotions have been a weight in my chest and a ringing in my ears. I feel cut off, isolated, like the gulf is too wide and that I'm not the right person to do the bridging. But there's an obvious problem with me as a privileged white person laying too heavy a claim to our city's collective trauma. I haven't had to have the talk with my 9-year-old son about how to de-escalate interactions with law enforcement. I don't fear for my safety or how people holding physical or structural power will treat me because of my skin color. If I'm honest with myself, at worst, my life has been inconvenienced over the past year as a result of our shared experiences. Black and brown Minneapolis residents have ample demonstrable evidence for the trauma that they hold, not just because of the past year, but for generations. So if I can't claim racialized trauma as the source of my shame and guilt, then where do these feelings come from? My meditation practice teaches me to listen to my body and try to connect emotions to felt tension. And when I've done that while thinking about race, I've noticed that the shame and guilt feel a lot like other times in my life when I've been frozen by a fear of confrontation and a perfectionism that can keep me from acting for fear that I'll be attacked as being wrong. And from my readings, I know that these fears of confrontation and of being labeled as wrong are the very core of white fragility, which we now know is an enormous barrier to cultural competence. As with other mental patterns in my life, a contemplative practice has allowed me to observe the pattern and name it, which is a first step to corrective action. Now that I can attach a white fragility label to a set of bodily sensations and tensions, I can sometimes take up the position of observer and talk myself out of following my destructive pattern of learned whiteness. I believe that many white folks feel guilt and shame for the real generational trauma that we have collectively loaded onto the backs of our Black, brown, and indigenous brothers and sisters since the founding of this country. And I believe that it is important for people to explore the roots of that shame, but not because we want to better ourselves or give ourselves comfort. We need to examine our shame because going to its roots will bring out into the light the aspects of whiteness that have caused harm to Black bodies, harm to brown bodies, and harm to white souls. I believe that whiteness has enabled a conditioned helplessness, born of perfectionism and the fear of confrontation, and that this helplessness pulls us into the collective sin of dehumanizing those people harmed by white supremacy. I believe that we cannot show up fully for our BIPOC brothers and sisters without first showing up for ourselves, not to excuse ourselves from responsibility or to center ourselves in the conversation, but to do the self-work necessary to control our responses to the past that we each carry.